Hi, and welcome to the last installment of the Lecture 3 series on articulatory phonetics. We are going to discuss the last parameter of consonants, which is the manner of articulation, and with that, we will wrap up the articulatory phonetics of consonants for this week, and we will then move on to the representation of vowels in the International Phonetic Alphabet, but that will be the topic of next week. So, what is manner of articulation? What is the last parameter called manner of articulation? It refers to the way that the oral tract is constructed to make a speech sound. There are four different manners of articulation of English. These are stops, fricatives, affricates, and approximants. Stops are also called as plosives, so you might see the term plosive in your textbook. Was a stop, it's the same thing, they are one and the same term. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to see each of the manner of articulation, and we are going to list the different sounds under all the manner of articulation, and by doing so, we will exhaustively list all the consonants of English. The first manner of articulation of English is a stop. And just as the name suggests, a stop is created when no air comes out of your mouth when you make the sound. So it's a complete blockage of the oral tract, and then suddenly the air comes out like a puff with a puff. So an example of this is the sound s versus t. Now I want you to produce the sound s, so you can say s, and you can see that the airflow is kind of smooth, it's not constricted. But try saying t, t. Can you say t, 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 t? It's not easy to do that. The reason is because when you say t, your airflow is completely stopped and then it is released with a puff of air. So t is an example of a stop in English, whereas a s is not an example of a stop in English. Now let's run through all the stops of English, and we will divide them according to the place of articulation. So first, we see that there are bilabial stops. So these are b, b, m. All nasals are stops in English because, as you know, there is no air that comes out of the mouth when you produce a nasal. So therefore, we treat them as a stop. B, b, m. And now you can see that you can define them according to the different parameters that we have seen so far. So p is a voiceless oral bilabial stop. B is a voiced oral bilabial stop. M is a voiced nasal bilabial stop. So if I ask you what is the one parameter that distinguishes P from B, what will be your answer? Yes, that's right. Voicing parameter is the answer between P and B. And what is the one parameter that distinguishes P, B from M? The answer is nasality, right? Because P and B are oral sounds, but M is a nasal sound. These are the alveolar stops in English. These are T, D, and N. T is a voiceless oral alveolar stop. D is a voiced oral alveolar stop. And N is a voiced nasal alveolar stop. The velar stops of English are K, G, N. These are voiceless oral velar stops, voiced oral velar stop, and a voiced nasal velar stop. You also have a glottal stop, which is written like the question mark. So this is the, I changed the marker, as you can see, because I thought that the light was reflective in the last video and you couldn't see my pen. So we're using a marker here. So this is a voiceless oral glottal stop, right? And so it's defined as a pure stoppage of air at the glottis, and that's why it's called a glottal stop. And the examples that I've given to you to understand where we use a glottal stop are things like oh, 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 oh. So you can see that the at the beginning is a glottal stop. And also in cases where you have two vowels, you insert the glottal stop in English. So like free evening is our free evening. It's free evening as one term, and then you put in the glottal stop in between free and evening. Let's move on to the second manner of articulation, and these are the fricatives. The fricatives, like the name suggests, has to do with the air moving through your oral cavity with friction. So it is made by a radical narrowing of the oral tract. And so when air comes out of this narrow passage, the air comes out turbulent. And this turbulent airflow is characteristic of a hissing sound. And so many of you may be Harry Potter fans, and now you know that the reason why Parseltongue has that kind of sinister hissing kind of sound is because J.K. Rowling used a lot of fricatives to create Parseltongue. So as you would have guessed, an example of a fricative is the sound s. So it's a hissing sound, right? So you can say s, and it sounds like, characteristic of a snake. And so the sound that is produced by s is completely unrestricted, and it comes out of a very narrow constriction of your mouth, and your air flows through this narrow constriction. So this is an example of a fricative. Now let's run through all the fricatives of English according to their place of articulation. The first are the labiodental fricatives such as f and v, and the one parameter that distinguishes f from v is the voicing parameter. F is a voiceless oral labiodental fricative and v is a voiced oral labiodental fricative. We also have the dental fricatives of English. These are the voiceless oral dental fricative and the, which is the voiced oral dental fricative. You have the alveolar fricatives such as s and z, the alveopalatal fricatives such as sh and j, and the glottal fricative, which is your h, which is your voiceless oral glottal fricative. So we have a glottal stop that we saw, which is your question mark, and then we have the glottal fricative, which is your h. The next manner of articulation is called an affricate. An affricate is a little bit more complex than a fricative or a stop, in that it is a speech sound that is made up of two different parts. An affricate begins as a stop, so there's a complete closure of your oral tract, and then it ends as a fricative, which is a narrow closure of the oral tract. So to illustrate affricates, the easiest way to do this is to produce the words top, shop, and chop. Top is produced with a stop, shop is produced with a fricative, and chop is produced with an affricate. And so you can see that top with a stop is total closure and then total release. Shop is a fricative, it's a narrow closure, but chop starts out with total closure like a stop, but it doesn't totally release it, it partially releases it like with the sh, right? So that's why it's called chop, ch, an affricate. So there are only two affricates in English and they're both alveopalatal. This is ch and j, and one is the voiceless oral alveopalatal affricate and the second is the voiced oral alveopalatal affricate. And you can see from the symbol the way that we had actually written it before that these are composed of two sounds. So stop, it starts with a stop and it ends with a fricative. That's why it's called an affricate. The last manner of articulation of English is an approximant. And an approximant is really the way that we start getting into the vowel system of the International Phonetic Alphabet. An approximant is also called as a semi-vowel because it is kind of in between a consonant and a vowel. Not fully a consonant, but not fully a vowel either. That's why it's called an approximant. So it also involves a narrowing of your vocal tract, but it's less radical than a fricative and more radical than a vowel. So here are some examples of approximants of English. Y is a voiced oral palatal approximant, and the W, which is the W, is a voiced oral labial approximant. Now, I have two notes over here. One is that the W is actually a labiovelar, even though we're just going to call it labial for the purposes of this class, but I just want to clear out this terminology in case you see this in your textbook or you see this on a website. But we will just use labial for the purposes of this class. And the second note that I have is that both these approximants are also called as glides in English. So you can call approximants as semivowels or glides in English. And the third note that I have over here has to do with different dialects of English in the United States. So there are some people who actually produce these two sounds, these two words very differently. So this is the word WHALE, which is often pronounced as whale, and WAIL, which is supposed to be very similar in pronunciation for many dialects of English, whale. But there are certain people who actually produce WHALE as whale, whale. And this is actually a different speech sound. It exists in certain dialects of English. If you don't speak the dialect, that's fine. But if you do speak the dialect, I just want to let you know that this is actually a different speech sound. It is written as an upside down W. So this is the wh sound, as in whale in English. And we will again not be concerned with this sound for the purposes of this class. There are also a couple of other approximants that have a different kind of place of articulation, but we didn't see them under place of articulation because there is only one sound that is created with this place of articulation. So we will just treat them as isolated instances in the English language. The first one is the upside down R symbol. So it is written like that. It's the upside down R symbol. And this is the voiced oral retroflex approximant. This is how you would say R in English. As you can see, I'm rolling my tongue. That is what I mean by retroflex. I've given you the secondary manner of articulation. And it is made with the tip of the tongue curled back. English only has one retroflex sound. There are other languages, such as my mother tongue again, that have multiple retroflexes. So I have sounds such as la and ra, etc., which are retroflexes, but English doesn't have them, so you don't have to worry about them. And then you have the voiced oral lateral approximant, which is your L in English, which is a lateral sound. And these approximants are also called as liquids. So you have your y and the w that are called as glides, and then you have the r and the l called as liquids. A very, very crucial note about the rolled R in English. Very often, my students get confused with writing R like that, right? Like you're spelling R. But this is a note, I have this in my IPA handout as well, that this sound in the IPA is a different sound. It refers to the tapped R of Spanish. So this is the ra, ra, ra in Spanish, because Spanish has three different R's. There is the r in Spanish, the ra, and this ra in Spanish. So we don't use this symbol in English at all, right? So just forget about this. Always use this symbol for English transcription of R. So use the upside down R. It's a very important note. I will mark you down if you don't use the upside down R, because that is a different R in English. And English doesn't have any other R. So make a note that you always have to use the upside down R when you're phonetically transcribing the English R into IPA. So to summarize these subsections of articulatory phonetics, we have looked at the IPA. You now know what the IPA looks like. You know why the IPA looks like the way it does. And each of the speech sound can be described by articulatory phonetics. And we have seen that there are 4 different parameters that we can use to describe consonants. So a sound can be voiced or voiceless. It can be nasal or oral. And it can also have these 7 places of articulation, such as bilabial, labiodental, dental, alveolar, alveopalatal, palatal, velar, and also the glottal. And there are 4 different manners of articulation, such as the stop, the fricative, the affricate, and the approximant. So this is where we end this week's lecture, and I will give you the IPA handout. It's going to be up on Blackboard. and that's going to be your friend. Keep it with you when you're going to do your assignment, as well as your pop quiz, and also it will be useful for you for the midterm. And I also have a resource over here for typing up IPA symbols, because you will be using this to type up your assignment. And so this is an example of a keyboard that you can use to type up each of these IPA symbols. That is all that I have for this week. Have a good rest of your week, and I will see you next week when we continue the International Phonetic Alphabet and we look at the vowels of the English alphabet.